Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It started with a quiet morning and a strange drone hovering above our yard. At first, it seemed harmless, just a machine, but soon it became clear we were being watched. What followed unraveled a dark web of surveillance, secrets, and a fight to reclaim our privacy. I first noticed it on a Wednesday morning. It was early, just past 7. My wife Erin was out on the deck, doing her yoga routine like she always did before work, and the kids were bouncing on the trampoline in the backyard, already burning through the last of their summer energy. I had my second cup of coffee and was standing by the window when I caught a faint buzzing, high and metallic, cutting through the usual bird song. At first I thought it was a wasp nest or a lawn crew warming up down the street. Then I saw it. A drone, medium-sized, black shell, smooth frame, commercial-grade rotors. It hovered just above the tree line, maybe 20 feet above our yard, motionless except for the slow tilt of its camera gimbal. I squinted. That lens was pointed straight at my wife. I stepped out onto the deck and waved my arm. The drone shivered in place, turned slightly, and drifted sideways over the fence. I watched it disappear over the edge of our neighbor Rick's yard and out of sight. I stood there for another minute, blinking, then turned to Erin. "Did you see that?" She didn't open her eyes. "See what?" "I didn't push it. Maybe it was a toy. Maybe some kid got bored with video games and wanted to harass birds. But it left me with an itch I couldn't scratch. I'd lived in Sonoma Hills for 6 years, and nothing like that had ever buzzed above our home. The area was mostly quiet, upper middle class, lots of retirees, a few families like us tucked near the outer edge of the gated community known as Green Heights. We weren't part of the HOA, thank God. Our property line ended just short of the border, like we'd narrowly escaped a bureaucratic noose. I didn't think much of it the next day, until it came back. This time, I was on a conference call trying to explain a security protocol failure to a client who insisted on using decade-old routers. Erin called me to the kitchen window. "It's here again," she said. The drone hung there, same height, same angle. It pivoted left, then back right, like it was scanning. The kids had just come out with popsicles. Erin looked at me and muttered, "That thing is watching." I opened the sliding door and stepped out with my phone, filming. The drone drifted back, turned sharply, and zipped away. That time it felt deliberate, like it knew I was filming. I pulled up the footage later, blurry, but the shape was clear. There was a logo on the side, a faint green triangle with a house in the middle. By the third time, I had no doubt. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't curious. It was coming here on purpose. I went to my neighbor Rick, a retired FAA inspector with a backyard full of rusting model planes and aviation magazines dating back to the Cold War. When I told him about the drone, his face stiffened. "You mean the black one with the twin rotor arms and the tilt gimbal?" I nodded. "It's been hovering over my shed every morning around 8, he said. "I thought it was mapping power lines or surveying for the county, but it always comes back to the same spots." He pulled out his old tablet and showed me a sketch he'd made. Crude maps of the flight path he'd observed. It was a tight loop, hitting 4 houses repeatedly, ours included. "That's not recreational," he said. "That's programmed. Someone uploaded coordinates and told it to patrol." We filed informal police reports, mine and Rick's together. The officer who took the statement, young guy, buzz cut, wearing reflective shades, seemed more amused than concerned. "Does it come into your yard?" he asked. "No, it hovers above it, maybe 20 feet up." "Then technically," he said, "it's not violating any trespass laws. FAA sets the minimum at 400 feet, but if they're not dropping in or landing, there's not much we can do." He handed back my report. "You can try the FAA or local zoning board, but I wouldn't expect much. Drones are the Wild West right now." I filed the FAA complaint anyway. 3 days later, I got a form letter back. Based on current airspace use regulations and available information, the reported activity does not constitute a violation under Part 107 of the Federal Aviation Regulations. Translation: you're out of luck. That week, Erin stopped doing yoga outside. The kids asked why the robot mosquito kept showing up every morning. I didn't have an answer. Then came the letter. It arrived in a pristine white envelope, hand-delivered, no stamp. The header read, Green Heights Property Owners Association, and the signature at the bottom, Karen Eldwell, President. "Dear resident," it began, We are committed to maintaining safety and visual harmony across our community, including adjacent zones of interest. You may have observed aerial surveillance equipment in recent days. This is part of a Green Heights community initiative to enhance security and deter inappropriate activity near common access points. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. I read it 3 times. We're not even part of your HOA. I wanted to shout, but I didn't. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and sat down at my desk. Something had shifted. This wasn't about a drone anymore. The thing about paranoia is, it doesn't start with tinfoil hats or conspiracy forums. It starts with your wife drawing the curtains in broad daylight and asking if the living room faces camera range. It starts with your kids flinching when they hear buzzing. It starts when you stand at your kitchen sink, coffee going cold, watching a mechanical insect hang over your house like it belongs there. And it starts to sink in. Maybe you're not being paranoid. Maybe you're just awake. Over the next few days, I tried to stay rational. I told myself that the drone was probably targeting a much broader area, maybe watching for package theft or trespassers. After all, we did live on the edge of a gated community, emphasis on gated. I even tried contacting the Green Heights HOA directly, left a voicemail, wrote a carefully worded email. No response. Then I talked to my neighbor again, Rick, the FAA guy. This time, he didn't just talk. He acted. He'd set up an old FLIR camera on his garage roof. Infrared. High resolution. Overkill maybe, but Rick was the type who didn't half-ass anything involving technology. 3 mornings in a row, he recorded the drone's flight path. When he showed me the footage, my stomach turned. It wasn't just flying overhead. It was stopping. Precisely. Over my backyard, over my kid's trampoline, over the window where Aaron used to stretch. The timestamps were consistent between 7:30 and 8:15, Monday through Friday. The drone hovered for roughly 20 seconds each time, rotated its camera, then moved to the next property. It's a programmed pattern, Rick said, tapping the tablet. Geofenced points, not manual piloting. Somebody set it to run loops. This is surveillance, not security. That night, I rewatched the clips 5 times. The next morning, I emailed the FAA again, this time including the videos, screenshots of the drone, timestamps, even a snippet of the HOA's letter. I titled it, Formal Complaint, Unauthorized Surveillance of Non-HOA Property by HOA Drone. A week passed. The response was the same template, word for word. No violations observed. Contact local law enforcement if concerned. I'd already done that. Twice. So I tried a new angle. I drafted a community notice and went door to door on our block. The wording was careful, concerning drone activity near private property, and I kept it neighborly. In total, I got signatures from 12 homeowners. Most had seen the drone. A few hadn't noticed it, but were disturbed once I explained. One woman, a mother of 3, said she thought it was Amazon until her toddler pointed at it during bath time through the window. We brought the petition to a town hall meeting. I spoke for 3 minutes, stuck to facts, didn't raise my voice. Rick followed with diagrams and FAA terms like unregistered altitudes and non-consensual imaging. Then Karen stood up, polished, confident, dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. She introduced herself, Karen Eldwell, president of the Green Heights Property Owners Association, with that faux humble tone that's all teeth and lipstick. She thanked us for our civic engagement and assured the room that the HOA drone was fully compliant with federal and municipal regulations, intended only to enhance community safety and deter undesirable behaviors. She didn't look at me when she said undesirable. Then she added, "Let me be clear, no one is watching you. Our security systems are programmed to monitor perimeters and high-risk areas, nothing more. If certain residents feel threatened by lawful oversight, perhaps they should ask themselves why." Some people in the room nodded. A few looked uncomfortable. I felt like I'd been slapped in the face and then told to apologize for it. The next day, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was less friendly. Interference with active surveillance operations may be considered obstruction. Any attempt to disable or damage association equipment may result in civil penalties. The phrase, trespass by technology, was used, whatever the hell that meant. I forwarded everything to my lawyer friend in San Francisco. He replied with 2 words, "This reeks." Still, there was no action I could take, not legally. Not without evidence that the drone was capturing private, inappropriate, or intrusive content, and the HOA had already thought of that because the drone wasn't streaming publicly. It was sending its data straight into their private network. So, I made a decision. I installed my own system, 2 motion tracking cameras, infrared with cloud backup and offline redundancy. I aimed them at the sky. I gave Aaron a heads up and explained to the kids what I was doing. I told them it was just so we can find out where the flying robot comes from. They seemed to accept that. Then, a week later, I caught the drone in full close-up. High resolution, perfect light. I paused the footage and zoomed in. There it was. A sticker, not just a logo this time. A registration tag, clear as day. A serial number, an FAA ID. I looked it up. The registration was valid. And the registered operator? GH Security Operations, Green Heights HOA. They'd admitted it without shame, but now I had something they hadn't expected, proof. I never thought I'd end up standing in my backyard with a rifle, feeling like a patriot defending airspace. But that is exactly where this story was about to go. Not that I planned any of it. I actually tried to sleep on it, multiple nights. Each morning I woke up hoping the drone would simply vanish, that maybe Karen would find a new hobby, like torturing houseplants instead of neighborhoods. But denial only lasts until the buzzing starts again. It came back the following Tuesday. Same time as always, 7:30. Aaron was inside making breakfast. The kids were gathering their backpacks for school, and I was outside sipping coffee like any other suburban dad hiding from the sound of serial arguments. Then that familiar whir slid into my ears. I looked up. It hovered directly above me. Maybe 15 feet up this time, low enough to almost feel the rotor wash against my face. Not today, I muttered. I'd already set up my camera on the rail, angled up, capturing every second. I'd rehearsed this in my head. If it crosses the property line, if it invades our privacy again, if I catch its eye, whatever passes for an eye in a floating corporate parasite, I'm ending this. The drone tilted forward slightly, its camera gimbal hanging like a vulture's head. It pointed at me, and then at the sliding door where Aaron was visible in silhouette. I felt something. Anger, protectiveness, humiliation. They all punched through at once. Inside the garage, behind my toolbox, lay an old hunting rifle passed down from my grandfather. I had never fired it at anything more alive than a stack of beer cans in my 20s. I grabbed it, loaded it with shaking hands, and walked right back out. I felt ridiculous at first. 38-year-old IT consultant cosplaying as a sniper. But then the drone dipped lower, and all the embarrassment burned off. My focus narrowed to a single point, the blinking lens that dared to watch my family. I took a slow breath, aimed carefully, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked the quiet morning. The drone jerked midair like a marionette with its strings cut. Then the rotors sputtered, and it tumbled down in a chaotic spin, crashing into my lawn with a metallic clatter. For one long second, everything was silent. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I rushed to the drone, scooped it up like forensic evidence, and brought it straight into the garage. I didn't want the HOA storming in to retrieve their fallen eye. But they didn't need to storm in because the police arrived first. 2 patrol cars rolled up within 10 minutes, lights off but urgency in their posture. Officer Shade, the amused one from the first report, stepped out with a far less amused expression this time. Behind him stood another officer and a woman in a neon vest with a tablet. And right then, like a demon conjured by ego, Karen Eldwell herself marched up the driveway in heels clearly not designed for suburban combat. "Arrest him," she snapped before the officers even said hello. "We have footage of him destroying HOA property." "I destroyed surveillance equipment illegally spying on my family," I replied, gripping the drone behind my leg. "That equipment was legally registered," Karen shot back. "And you are going to pay for what you've done." Officer Shade raised a hand. "Everybody relax. Mr. Hargrave, we need the device." "It landed on my property," I said, "and it was recording from above my property." The officers exchanged looks. The woman with the tablet approached, tapping quickly. "Serial ID confirms HOA registry. Damage estimate significant. Software loss substantial." Karen smirked like she'd just sunk a battleship. Shade sighed. "Mr. Hargrave, we're going to have to collect the drone as evidence. You can provide a statement down at the station." "And what about them spying on us?" I demanded. Shade's mouth tightened. "That's a civil matter. You shouldn't have shot it." I wanted to argue, but the look he gave me said this wasn't a negotiation. By evening, a thick packet landed in my mailbox. A formal lawsuit, HOA versus Hargrave. Claim: vandalism, destruction of property, obstruction of community safety operations. Compensation demanded, $9,000. The next 2 weeks were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and legal words designed to make normal people feel stupid. Our hearing was scheduled absurdly fast, and the courtroom felt stacked against me the moment I walked in. HOA lawyers presented shiny documents and regulations. Aaron and I had grainy footage and fear. The judge didn't deliberate long. "Mr. Hargrave," he said without any malice, just bureaucratic fatigue, "the law protects private property, including unmanned aerial vehicles. You cannot resort to self-help tactics like this. Compensation in the amount specified will be required." He struck his gavel. Just like that, I was officially the criminal. We walked out feeling smaller than when we entered. Aaron squeezed my hand and whispered, "It will be okay." I pretended to believe her. That night, I logged into our bank account and saw the hole that $9,000 carved into our savings, a punishment for trying to protect my family. But as I sat alone at my desk later, staring at the silent sky outside, a single thought kept repeating in my mind. If this was their opening move, what the hell was coming next? The thing about losing a court case is that it doesn't end when the gavel drops. Not really. The sentence may be inked and filed away, but the consequences, they seep into your days, poison your routines, make every normal task feel like it's happening under a microscope. And in my case, I had a strong suspicion that microscope had rotors and a serial number. The $9,000 payment cleared the HOA's bank account 2 days after the hearing. Aaron and I didn't talk much that weekend. Not out of anger, more like exhaustion. There was a numbness in the air. I think we both knew it wasn't over. Monday morning started with slashed tires. All 4 of them. Aaron had just dropped the kids off at school and parked at the faculty lot. She teaches 2nd grade. When she came back to the car, the front tires were deflated, the rear ones torn through with something sharp. The school called me before she could. By the time I got there, a sheriff's deputy was already writing up the report. Vandalism, no witnesses, no security footage from that side of the lot. Just 4 angry gouges and a note slipped under her windshield wiper that read, "Lawbreakers shouldn't have cars." That night, I installed motion lights on every corner of the house. By Wednesday, the trampoline in our yard had been hit with orange spray paint. The word perverts sprawled across the jumping surface in shaky all caps. The kids cried. Aaron cried. I didn't cry. I wanted to burn something. I printed the security camera footage from that night. A figure in a hoodie and gloves. Couldn't make out the face. The police took the footage and gave me the same line they always did. "We'll follow up if we get anything." Then they were gone. It wasn't just the vandalism. That I could deal with. What broke me was the eyes. They were everywhere. Cars we didn't recognize parked for too long on our street. People walking past with phones angled toward our house. Once, I caught a woman I'd never seen before pretending to jog, then stopping to take a picture of our mailbox. Another time, 2 men in polos stood across the street pretending to talk while holding clipboards, doing nothing except staring at our windows. I started sleeping with the lights on in the hallway. Rick, the FAA guy, came over with a 6-pack one night and offered to camp out in the garage with a baseball bat. "This isn't random," he said. "This is coordinated." I believed him. Then came the letter. It arrived certified mail with all the smugness of legalese and none of the warmth of a neighbor. The envelope bore the HOA seal, and inside was a printed statement from Karen Eldwell, president of Green Heights Property Owners Association. The language was, as always, slick and insulated. It began by expressing concern over the recent uptick in tensions within the adjacent neighborhood. It then detailed with no subtlety the HOA's intention to file a community safety evaluation request with the county, based on reports that suggest escalating aggression, firearm discharge, and potential psychological instability on a property bordering our child-sensitive zone. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The final paragraph warned that should further evidence arise of behavior inconsistent with community safety expectations, the HOA would consider formal action through Child Protective Services and local authorities. I read it twice. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and threw the letter directly into the garbage disposal. That night, Erin told me she wanted to take the kids to her sister's for a few days, just to get away. "I feel like we're being hunted," she whispered, "and no one's helping." I didn't argue. Instead, I called a lawyer. Her name was Emma Tilson, mid-40s, sharp as a nail gun, and known locally for shredding predatory HOA contracts like they were toilet paper. I gave her everything: the drone, the lawsuit, the aftermath, the graffiti, the note, the camera footage, the tire slashing. She listened without interrupting, took a few notes, then leaned back in her chair and said, "These people aren't protecting a neighborhood. They're running a surveillance syndicate." Her plan was simple: build a case for civil harassment, privacy violation, and coordinated intimidation. Start with letters, escalate to injunction. If it failed, file a lawsuit of our own. But Emma also asked an important question. "Do you have anyone technical who could find out what that drone was really doing?" I told her I might. Rick was smart, but his world was analog. He could tell you the speed of a crosswind by licking his finger, but he didn't hack systems. I needed someone with deeper tools. That's when I knocked on the door of Robert Crowley. Robert lived 2 houses down, 70-something, ex-government, rumored to have worked in cybersecurity before it was cool, as the neighborhood kids said. I'd seen him walking with a cane, always in a pressed collared shirt, never without a book in his hand. He barely spoke to anyone, but when I told him I needed to know what a drone might be doing beyond what it claimed, it was like lighting a fuse. He invited me in. His office looked like a CIA museum. Radios, old servers, antennae setups, 3 monitors with active code screens, a Faraday cage, and what I swear was a deconstructed weather satellite. I showed him the old footage of the drone, the serial number, the registration ID. I told him about the logo, the packet sniffing Emma had mentioned. Robert didn't blink. "I'll need 72 hours, he said, "and a copy of anything it transmitted." I gave him everything I had. And then I waited. Robert Crowley didn't knock. He didn't call. He just showed up on my doorstep 70 hours later at exactly 9 a.m., holding a manila envelope thick enough to demand respect. He wore the same collared shirt, but this time it was buttoned to the top, and his cane tapped harder than usual as he crossed the threshold. "I need you to sit down," he said without preamble, "because what I found goes way past anything you're expecting." I sat. He opened the envelope and laid out printed screenshots, connection maps, and signal analysis charts like a man dealing a game of national security poker. The drone, Robert explained, wasn't just recording video, it was transmitting it in real time to a cloud server hosted under a domain owned by a shell company called Nimbus Oversight Systems. The IP addresses bounced through multiple proxies, but with a little pressure and some old-school triangulation, Robert traced them back to 2 physical server locations, both registered under businesses owned by John Eldwell, husband of Karen Eldwell. The kicker, one of the server nodes wasn't just receiving data, it was hosting an application, a proprietary, mobile-accessible, password-gated interface. One that allowed select users to view live feeds, download archived footage, and, brace yourself, flag events based on AI-generated behavioral tags. "It's a surveillance management system," Robert said grimly, "and a damn sophisticated one. Think Ring. But if it worked like a private intelligence agency." Each flagged event came with a user ID, timestamp, and location. Robert had scraped a backup of the database from a public dev instance they apparently forgot to lock. What he showed me next made my stomach turn. There were clips, dozens of them. Me, standing shirtless at the grill. Aaron stretching in yoga pants on the patio. My daughter playing in a sprinkler in her swimsuit. Zoomed, tracked. Labeled, unusual motion, restricted clothing, potential exposure. Another clip. The Morrisons, our neighbors, arguing in their kitchen through a half-open window. And then one labeled Child Solo Movement, showing our son Evan riding his bike in the backyard. My hands were shaking. "They've been recording this neighborhood for over a year," Robert said. "Not just their own HOA. Yours too. Probably others. It's not just about security. This is systemic, monetized, industrial." Emma, the lawyer, nearly choked on her coffee when we told her. She called a private investigator she trusted, ex-FBI, and we scheduled a meeting that same evening. His name was Dean Madsen, bald, intense, and with a handshake like a hydraulic press. He listened to Robert's technical breakdown, reviewed the footage, and nodded once. "Let me dig," he said. "This smells like a RICO case waiting to happen." For the next week, we worked as a team. Robert handled the technical forensics. Emma began compiling affidavits from affected neighbors, and Dean pulled the corporate thread. What we learned was worse than we imagined. Karen Eldwell wasn't acting alone. Two other HOA board members, Gary Homan and Angela Ruiz, were co-signatories on a business entity called Civic Eye Systems, an LLC based out of Arizona, which had received tens of thousands in consulting fees from property management firms. Those payments were funneled through intermediaries into development grants approved by the HOA itself, which meant Karen and her inner circle had built an illegal surveillance infrastructure, funded it through HOA dues, and were now profiting off private footage streamed from people's homes without consent. Dean located two more victims, a young couple from 3 streets over who'd moved after discovering strange men parked outside their yard for days at a time, and a widowed teacher whose video of her showering had been anonymously posted to a Russian site and traced back to an IP under Civic Eye. Emma called the county prosecutor. The response was swift. On a brisk Tuesday morning, 4 unmarked vehicles rolled into Green Heights. Federal agents and county investigators served simultaneous warrants on the HOA office, Karen's house, and Gary's lakeside cabin. Karen's reaction, according to one neighbor, involved screaming something about patriotic surveillance and neighborhood morality. They took her away in handcuffs. We watched it all from my living room window. Erin held my hand so tightly her nails dug crescents into my palm. When they wheeled out 2 full server racks wrapped in static-proof sheeting, I knew this was bigger than just us. Robert, for his part, remained strangely quiet throughout. When I asked him why, he simply said, "Because I've seen this before, and I know it never ends with just one arrest." Later that day, Emma got a call. The DA's office wanted a formal deposition from me and Robert. The footage we had, the documents, the correspondence, everything would be entered into evidence. But more than that, they wanted to open a federal criminal case. Charges included illegal surveillance, trafficking in personal data, criminal conspiracy, and, chillingly, endangerment of minors. I wasn't sure what hit me harder, the realization that we'd been the targets of a digital predator ring, or the knowledge that this all started because I shot down a drone. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt violated. And very, very ready to burn this whole empire to the ground. The hallway outside the prosecutor's office smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Erin sat beside me, arms folded tight, eyes scanning every suited figure that passed like they might leap out and accuse us. Robert stood further down the corridor, speaking in low tones with Dean. I could tell he hated being back in anything resembling a courthouse, but his hands weren't shaking. Mine were. Inside, the assistant district attorney was younger than I expected, sharp, focused, and efficient. She let us speak, didn't interrupt, but asked razor-edged questions that made my throat dry. Yes, we had video proof of the drone's flights. Yes, we had screenshots of the app interface. Yes, we had evidence of shell companies, financial transfers, server locations, and most damning, Robert's full breakdown of the face tagging and behavioral flagging used to catalog footage of minors and families. When we were done, she leaned back in her chair and said simply, "This might be the most grotesque abuse of HOA authority I've seen in 15 years. She assured us the charges would be pursued, both at the county level and federally. They'd already secured temporary injunctions to freeze Civic Eye's bank accounts. A grand jury had been summoned. The next wave of shock came from the media. Dean, who apparently had more connections than God, leaked the bare essentials to a friend at the San Francisco Chronicle. Within 24 hours, we were in the middle of a media wildfire. Headlines: Neighborhood surveillance ring busted in Sonoma Hills. HOA drone scheme exposed. Face tagging app sold access to private home videos. News vans line the street. Our mailbox filled with letters of support and rage. Strangers brought casseroles like we were grieving. My kids weren't allowed outside without us anymore. Erin cried every night, but the HOA wasn't going down quietly. The remaining board members, those not under arrest, held an emergency session and issued a public statement denying knowledge of the drone program. They blamed Karen and her rogue associates, claimed the HOA's books were clean, and warned residents against jumping to conclusions before investigations were complete. Then they did something absolutely insane. They filed a counter lawsuit against me. The charge: malicious destruction of property and intentional defamation. They wanted to revive the $9,000 drone destruction case, this time using the court attention to argue that I had violated their privacy by filming the drone and accessing their internal systems without consent. It was a desperate play, but it wasn't harmless. Their lawyer, some smug, shiny-toothed parasite named Darren Clay, tried to have an emergency hearing scheduled to freeze my assets pending resolution of the new suit. Said I was a high-risk defendant likely to flee the county. It didn't work. The judge, the same one who had ruled against me in the original drone case, refused the emergency motion but agreed to hear the new lawsuit in civil court. That made Erin furious. "This isn't just retaliation," she hissed. "This is suppression. They're trying to bankrupt us before they're even on trial. We had to go public again, this time, with everything." At Robert's suggestion, we invited 2 journalists, one from ProPublica, the other from a local tech publication, to see the full system in action. Robert gave them a controlled walkthrough of the interface, showing how users could flag events, replay footage, and even subscribe to updates on watched individuals. The app had profiles, mine, Erin's, our kids', faces matched across time. Notes like frequent shirtless outdoor presence, domestic dispute sounds, and "My blood ran cold. Child left unattended for 12 mins. Ardo ate sex." That article hit harder than the first. Now the feds weren't just interested, they were furious. The Department of Justice issued subpoenas. The California Attorney General launched a parallel investigation. Tech companies named in the app's development chain scrambled to release statements. One of them, Brightward Data Solutions, admitted that they had no knowledge their facial recognition API was being used in a residential context. Karen was denied bail. The footage from her home, seized during the raid, showed her logging into the app multiple times per day. She had profiles of over 200 individuals, adults, children, neighbors, strangers, walking dogs. And in a twist that shook even Robert, the app had a favorites list. My family was at the top. Robert didn't speak for a full minute after showing us that. I wanted to scream, to throw something. But instead, I stared at the floor and felt something darker rise. Not fear anymore, but something harder. A cold resolve that this wouldn't end until every single one of them paid for what they did. But that night, things got worse. A brick came through our living room window at 3:18 a.m. Taped to it was a photo, a drone still, blurry but unmistakable, showing Erin changing clothes through a second-story window. The word liar was written across it in red marker. My kids were in the next room. I sat awake till morning with a baseball bat across my lap and a GoPro live streaming to a remote server. That was the night I realized this wasn't about the drone anymore. It was war. I didn't sleep the next night either, or the one after that. Every creak in the house made my hand twitch toward the baseball bat. I'd installed motion lights, flood cams, even an infrared tripwire I bought from a tactical surplus site. Anything to make us feel less exposed. Erin insisted the kids sleep in our room, and I didn't argue. We were under siege in our own home. But it was the lawsuit that kept me awake more than anything. Clay's legal team was relentless. They filed motion after motion, demanding access to our devices, calling into question the legality of Robert's hack, accusing us of fabricating evidence, and public defamation with malicious intent. They even tried to subpoena my emails, personal and work, on the claim that I'd been coordinating a smear campaign. Dean called it a smokescreen. They're bleeding you out through process. They know they're cooked, so now they want to bankrupt you before it sticks. I believed him, especially when I saw the paperwork from our legal retainer. Another 10 grand gone. My savings were turning into ash. And then came the tipping point. One of the journalists who'd written the expose, a guy named Carl Sanchez from the tech outlet, sent me an encrypted message. His source inside Brightward had come forward with internal documents. A PowerPoint pitch deck from a private demo 3 months earlier, showcasing HOA integrated predictive behavior modules. They weren't just spying, they were profiling. Children marked as unstructured, teens flagged for unsupervised behavior, couples labeled as domestically unstable, all based on video patterns, proximity to known HOA members, even inferred emotions via pose estimation. It was surveillance crossed with machine learning, wrapped in suburban paranoia. Carl warned me, if this got out, there'd be a storm, not just in California, but nationwide. The system was part of a pilot program. 5 other HOAs in 3 different states were already on board. I felt like throwing up. Robert, when he saw the docs, got even quieter than usual. This is mass data harvesting under a fake HOA umbrella. Karen didn't build this. She bought it. We're looking at something way bigger. We met that night in Robert's basement, which he'd turned into something halfway between a tech lab and a Cold War bunker. He showed me a server image he pulled off one of the backup repositories, partially encrypted, but with enough open fields to recognize hundreds of residential addresses, names, metadata tags. My address was in bold. So was Dean's. So were the Thompsons, the elderly couple who'd joined us early on. So were dozens of neighbors, some we hadn't even spoken to. We needed to go nuclear. The next day, Robert and I drove to Sacramento and walked into the office of the state attorney general. We handed them everything, not just the videos, but the code samples, the financial links, the metadata extractions, and the pitch deck. The AG's team took one look at the materials and asked us very calmly to wait in another room. 2 hours later, we were sitting across from 3 federal agents, and just like that, the case left our hands. That week was chaos. Search warrants were issued across Sonoma Hills and beyond. One of the other HOAs involved, a retirement community in Nevada, suddenly froze all operations. Karen's husband, Mark Elwell, was detained at LAX trying to board a flight to Belize. Her nephew's IT business vanished overnight. The Civic Eye app was pulled from every store, and Brightword's stock tanked after the DOJ formally named them in a preliminary federal probe into civil surveillance programs operating outside lawful consent. The countersuit against me, dismissed without hearing, judge's ruling. Case not only lacks merit, it demonstrates retaliatory intent in light of ongoing criminal proceedings. But I wasn't celebrating. 2 nights later, a car drove slowly past our house around 3 a.m. Lights off, plates covered. I called the cops. They came, looked around, shrugged, said if nothing was damaged, there was no probable cause. The threat hadn't vanished. It had just gone underground. And then, finally, someone cracked. A mid-level HOA board member named Ellen Bishop walked into the prosecutor's office and flipped. She gave a sworn statement. Karen had been running the surveillance ring for over 2 years. The app's data access was sold to at least 11 third parties, including a private security firm and 2 analytics startups. HOA dues had been funneled into development costs under fake line items. Ellen claimed she'd kept her mouth shut out of fear, and because she was promised a cut of future licensing revenue. She gave them names, IP addresses, emails, code commits. The case officially shifted from civil invasion of privacy to federal conspiracy and trafficking of personal data. That was the final blow. Karen was hit with 18 new charges, including conspiracy to commit unlawful surveillance, fraud, and trafficking in biometric data. Her bail was revoked permanently. Brightword's founder resigned. The HOA board was dissolved by court order. But even as the system collapsed, the question still hung over me. Why us? Why my family? Why that drone? Why pick my backyard? And then Robert told me something I hadn't seen coming. It wasn't random, he said. You were tagged on the very first day of system calibration. Your property sits at a junction of 3 zoning lines. The app used your house as a control point, a test case for non-member proximity patterns. We'd been the test. My family had been ground zero for an illegal digital experiment in suburban surveillance. I had never felt more violated. Karen's trial drew crowds, not just locals, but media from across the country. The courtroom was packed the day I testified, not about the drone, but about what came after, about fear, surveillance, watching my kids play while knowing someone was watching us. Her defense tried to spin the story as community safety gone too far. But with Ellen's testimony, the server evidence, and the DOJ charges, it collapsed quickly. Karen didn't just authorize spying, she monetized it. Her HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. It was a front for data trafficking. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with no parole. 5 others, including her husband and nephew, got between 4 and 7 years. The court ordered Brightword to pay restitution to over 60 families. Our HOA was dissolved by a judge, and its assets were sold off to compensate the victims. We received a check for $180,000. More importantly, we got a formal apology from the state. I used the money to fortify the house, rebuilt the fences, upgraded every system. Aaron took the kids on a trip out of state just to breathe clean air. A year later, I stood before a city council hearing on drone regulation. My case had helped push a statewide bill limiting drone surveillance in residential areas. I wasn't an activist, just a man who wanted his yard back. It all started with one drone, a quiet morning, and a line someone crossed without asking. And that's when I knew. Some battles pick you,